Maxey from outside. Sixers lead, courtesy of Tyrese Maxey.
Deep to left field, going back is Locastro. It is gone!
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast with your host, Ryan Coyle. As always, a few days down the shore, now back ready to talk some college football, continuing our college football preview series, diving into another episode with one of the teams that I think, good or bad, is going to be talked about and kind of scrutinized the most, have arguably the toughest schedule that we have ever seen in one season for a college football team, and that's the 2024 Florida Gators. This team has a murderer's row of a schedule. We'll get into all that and more, break down the entire schedule, go over under wins. We'll recap last year, going a little bit about head coach Billy Napier, talk about the offense, the defense, what they're going to look like this year, and then give my final breakdown on the team. But we're keeping it rolling here. We got recording this on July 30th. We are 25 days away from kickoff for week 0. 30 days, I believe it is now, till, or, past, a little bit past that with Miami versus Florida kicking off on August 31st at 3:30. We're 31 days away from kickoff there. So college football getting closer and closer to us. So far in the series, we've covered Oklahoma State, Michigan, Memphis, Nebraska, LSU, Penn State, Colorado. Today, we're going to be hitting on Florida. Next episode after this, we're going to be hitting on Clemson as well. So trying to touch all the big teams and get into deep detail on all these big teams in 12 to 15-minute episodes and cover them here on the podcast. But as always, please like, subscribe, and we will look to keep it rolling here. As I said, this episode will be covering the 2024 Florida Gators. Head coach Billy Napier enters on potentially the hottest seat of any college football coach, major college football coach, at least heading into the year. 11-14 in his 2 years at Florida, 51-26 in his 6 years as a head coach. He was the head coach at Louisiana Lafayette before he made the trip to the right of him over to Florida. But he is entering the favorite. I saw on Twitter this year, on Twitter today, Billy Napier, I saw, enters the year as the favorite to be the first college football coach fired at plus 400. That's not something that you want, hanging over your head or your name kind of attached to or labeled to, but that's just the reality with the schedule they have. We'll go through it at the end, the entire schedule, but a super tough schedule, and especially the last 5 games. There's a chance their last 5 games are against all, at least preseason top 10 teams. We'll see what the season brings, but there's a good chance that those teams are all ranked in the top 25, potentially top 10 to 15. But when you look at the 2023 season, only 5-7 for Florida. They don't go bowling after going bowling the first year under Napier, but 5-7, 3-5 in the SEC. They lost 5 in a row to end the year, so not really any momentum. I think they started out 4-1 last year. They started out pretty well. They had that really nice, impressive win early against Tennessee, but they really kind of bottomed out after that. That was the peak of their season. Only played in 3 one-score games last year, so they had a couple blowout wins against some inferior opponents. They had that nice win, like I said, against Tennessee, but in the games they lost, especially down the stretch, they were getting blown out. They were 1-2 in those 3 one-score games. They failed to rank in the top 35 on any offensive category of the major 4 that are scoring, rushing, passing, and total offense, and didn't rank top 65 on any defensive categories. The same thing there with offense, defense, scoring, and total defense. They didn't rank in the top 65. So not a ton of optimism headed into a year where there's an argument that they have the toughest schedule ever. Kind of alluded to it, but over the last 5 weeks of the season, they play a neutral game versus Georgia. They play at Texas. They host LSU. They host Ole Miss, and they play at Florida State. Florida State, the favorite in the ACC. Ole Miss, a team projected to make the playoff. Texas, up there with Georgia as the favorite of the SEC. Georgia, the favorite as the SEC, the favorite to win the national title. LSU, they're a bit of a mystery, but Brian Kelly, all he does is win 10 games. He's won 10 games in 7 straight years. So that's going to be a team that, at worst comes to worst, is competitive. They're in the 8 to 10 win market, I think, this year, that LSU squad. So not the easiest schedule, and they get all those games in a row. So it is really imperative for Billy Napier and company to get off to a hot start. They start out week 1 against Miami. That is the game I'm looking forward to most in week 1 because, in-state rivalry there, a rivalry that goes back for decades. But Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal both enter with a lot of pressure on them. I think Napier a little bit more just because of playing in the SEC and how tough his schedule is. I think Cristobal might be able to buy himself another year just because even if they don't have a good year, which I'm very high on Miami, we'll get into an episode on them a little bit later. But Miami this year, I think, or they could fall into 8 to 9 wins potentially. Like that's how weak the ACC is really at the top there compared to the SEC. Florida's going to have to grind to get just to 6 wins and get to bowl eligibility. A lot of good recruits coming in last year. They have a 5-star quarterback on the roster right now. We'll see what happens with quarterback Graham Mertz this year if he makes it through the whole year. But just say Billy Napier gets fired after 3 or 4 games. Graham Mertz, they're 1-3 or something. Graham Mertz isn't lighting the world on fire. Don't be surprised if they turn the keys over to the 5-star quarterback and let him play and potentially try and get him to stay. I know the rest of the coaching staff probably won't be there, but if the 5-star quarterback is able to come in, his name's escaping me right now, but if he's able to come in, whoever would take over for Napier, if he does potentially get fired mid-year defensive coordinator, maybe that guy plays himself into a job if this new young stud QB comes in. So a lot of pressure heading into this season on Billy Napier. It's not a thing that I think he can really take lightly, if he wants to continue to be the coach at Florida. I think 6-6 would buy him a year number 4, but I think failing to make a bowl game, like repeating last year 5-7, wouldn't get them there just because it's such a hard competitive league now where it's like if you're giving these guys 3 to 4 years to try and build something up, they're getting passed potentially by someone else or these other teams. It's going to be really hard to get in front of an Ole Miss the way that they've been going, to get in front of a Texas now, to get in front of an Oklahoma potentially that's coming up, to get in front of a Tennessee who is looking really sharp and has maybe one of the best quarterbacks in Nico this year, a young quarterback there in the SEC. And then we haven't even mentioned Georgia, LSU, Alabama yet. Like if you're not really showing significant progress, it's best to kind of just blow it up and start new because it can't be a 3-4 year rebuild when you're trying to be a national title contender. And that's what Florida looks at themselves as, and also a team that, should be competing at least for one of those spots in the 12-team playoffs. So big year coming up for Florida. And like I said, whether it's good or bad, they're going to be one of the most talked about teams in the country this year because if it's good, they're going to really surprise people and exceed expectations. If it's bad, they could bottom out, and this could be, a 3-4 win team. So we'll get into kind of the offense and defense now, and then we'll go throughout the whole schedule. I'll give you my game-by-game predictions for this Florida Gators squad. When you look at the offense, that's supposed to be Billy Napier's calling card. Like I said, failed to crack the top 35 in any of those major offensive categories last year. That's just not going to cut it in the SEC, especially if you have defense that struggles like they did last year. And, looking at the roster this year, I'm not expecting a whole lot of improvement. But Graham Mertz returns at quarterback for the second straight year under Napier, and he actually had a solid season last year in year 2 in the system. This will be year 2 in the system, but he had a solid year last year. Expect him to be even better this year and hope to be a little bit improved. But I think he was one of the more underrated kind of players at the quarterback position in college football last year. 2,900 yards, 20 touchdowns, so only 3 interceptions. He only played 11 games. He broke his collarbone down the stretch. But he led the SEC in completion percentage at 72.9%. So a real accurate quarterback. They're probably looking for some more explosive plays and some downfield plays this year out of him in the offense. You'll probably have to sacrifice that completion percentage, but that's something that I think Florida is going to look to kind of get after a little bit more. Montrell Johnson will be the starting running back this year, 817 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns to his name last year. Expect those numbers to jump. He could be an 1,100, 1,200 yard back. Trevor Etienne transferred out. He was a really good, young, promising running back, younger brother of Travis Etienne from Clemson and the Jaguars. He transferred to rival Georgia. So this is Johnson's backfield now. I expect him to get, a workload of the carries and be kind of one of the premier elite backs of college football and be the guy that this running game goes through. The offense ranked 46 last year in total offense, averaging 409 yards per game. That's not terrible, but those numbers just aren't going to fully cut it to get to the top of the SEC. You have to be able to have one of these top 10 to 15 offenses, especially if your defense isn't going to be that strong. Florida lost their top receiver last year as well, and Ricky Pearsall. He went in the first round, at the end of the first round, to the 49ers. So that's a big hole there. That's a significant hit to the passing game. But Khalil Jackson, he returned as a starter, and he's going to most likely start alongside Wisconsin transfer Shamir DK. So those are the two receivers to know right now for the Florida team. They could have some young guys step up. And the tight end spot has a couple young sophomores that they're going to be relying on that played last year as freshmen in the passing game. So I think this is a year that last year was not so much a reboot, but kind of just a developmental type of season for Florida. And they're expecting these guys like Montrell Johnson, like Mertz, like the receivers, like the tight ends, all to be able to step up and kind of improve this offense from last year and improve those statistical numbers as well. The offensive line brings back 3 starters, lost 2 guys to the portals, but 3 starters as well. That's pretty significant for an SEC offensive line. Total offense returned 7 starters this year. So the roster retention and the continuity, I would expect those numbers to kind of pick it up. And with Mertz and all his experience playing between Wisconsin and now Florida, be back in the fold. He should be one of the better QBs in the SEC again. And if he takes care of the football, 20 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions in those 11 games, he's going to give them shots to win. They just have to be able to kind of pull out these games. And the defense now that we'll get into, I think they have to be a little bit more opportunistic this year and be able to kind of create more turnovers, create better field position for this Florida offense that isn't really screaming super dynamic ability, but solid enough that I think they're going to be able to keep Florida in a lot of games and be able to go score for score at times. But if they're playing in the 40s or something, they're going to get outmatched by teams like Georgia, by teams like LSU. I think is going to be able to put points. Ole Miss, Tennessee, teams like those. It's going to be hard to kind of go score for score with them. When you look at the defense, though, a unit that struggled last year, gave up 30 or more in 6 of their last 8 games and gave up 33 or more in 4 of the last 5. And as we talked about earlier, lost all 5 of those last games to end the season. And they gave up 33 or more in 4 of those. So defense, too, that really kind of crumbled down the stretch, was never really strong throughout the year. But they ranked 69th in total defense, 75th in scoring defense, 79th in rushing defense, and 70th in passing defense. Once again, if you don't have a super dynamic top 10 to top 15 offense, it's not going to cut it. I mean, you even look at LSU last year, who went 10-3. They had the number 1 total offense, the number 1 scoring offense, but they weren't able to stop anyone on the defensive side of the ball. Florida wasn't even top 35 in rushing, passing, scoring, or total. And along with the defense, they only go 5-7 there in the SEC. So if you're not going to have an elite offense, you need at least a more competent defense than this, something that ranks top 30, top 40 in most metrics to give you a chance each and every Saturday, just because you're not getting really any cupcakes in that conference now, except if you're playing a team like a Vanderbilt. Even off the top of my head, like South Carolina maybe could be considered kind of a cupcake in the conference, but that's pretty much about it, how deep and good this conference is and who you're going to be running into each and every week. There isn't a ton of hype and promise with this defensive group as well. But it is believed, I think, that they could step up as well as the offense with some of the guys returning. If they're going to win games, I think it's believed with kind of within the locker room and on the outside that it's going to be because of the offensive side of the ball. The defense is just going to have to be a little bit more opportunistic, maybe even fall into some luck with some fumbles or some batted balls that give them a chance, because it's not really screaming super positivity for this defensive unit, in my opinion. They only finished 7th in the SEC last year in turnovers. That's kind of like middle of the pack, but with not the top flight recruits or the top flight transfers, or even a coach in Billy Napier, do we really know that he can coach football on the offensive side of the ball at the SEC level either? With so many question marks, it's like this defense has to be top 2, top 3 in turnovers if you really want to win 8 to 9 games or something and shock the world and win a lot of these really tough games. You're going to have to fall into some luck, I think, and really win the turnover battle each and every week. But a few names to watch for this defensive group are linebacker Shamar James and cornerback Jason Marshall Jr. They return as 2-year starters already as they enter their junior year. Linebacker Pup Howard is a transfer from South Carolina. He looks like he's ready to be the best linebacker on this defense as well after a strong spring. But as an entire unit, this defensive group struggled to tackle last year. James returning though at linebacker and the addition of Howard, they should be better in that department at least and be able to kind of control the middle of the field, especially in the running game. 3 guys return on the defensive line who were starters last year as well, and Tyreek Sapp, Cam Jackson, and Caleb Banks. Look for all those 3 to be impact guys and guys that step up this year as well. But with 6 returning starters from last year on the defensive side of the ball and 7 on offense, I think those are 2 things or one thing, but on both sides of the ball that you could point to and be like, all right, a year of experience in the SEC, they should be able to step it up. If they're developing right, they had a good offseason, being able to retain those guys, that type of talent. Whether or not they fully developed over the past year, that experience, if it got to them or not, if they were able to get something from last year, fuel to the fire for a year going 5-7 after, a disappointing first year kind of as well with Napier only winning 6 games. There are some things that point to where it's like, all right, these first 2 years were kind of the foundation years, and this is the year we're kind of ready to take off. You would like to see maybe an easier schedule. I don't even know, looking at the schedule, we'll get into a minute, but I'd say they're probably not even going to be favored in 9 of their 12 games this year. And for Florida, that's pretty kind of embarrassing. So you have to look at it. I think if you're a Florida fan, that what we're bringing back, we hope they've developed over the past 2 years and they're ready to kind of take off in year 3. But the secondary on that defense is a big question mark. They're going to be tested by a lot of these high-profile QBs, having to play Carson Beck, having to play Quinn Ewers, having to play Grant Nussmeier, who I think is going to be a really good quarterback as well, having to play Nico. It's going to be tough sledding out there, I think, at times for this Florida defensive team. But we will get into the schedule now, the breakdown. I don't really think that was a very convincing preview for if you were a Florida fan and potentially thinking that this could be a better year than some people are saying on the outside. But pulling up the schedule now, share my screen, and we'll run through the entire thing. So I have this Florida team losing that week 1 game versus Miami. Like I said, I think that Miami game is the game I'm looking forward to the most in week 1 because it is a battle between 2 in-state rivals that have coaches whoever loses that game, their seat will be boiling hot for the rest of the year. Miami's actually a 1-point favorite right now at Florida. I'm very high on that Miami team this year. Spoiler, I think that they're going to win the ACC. But I got Miami winning that game. I got Florida winning their second game versus Samford. I have them then also beating Texas A&M. But that's not a layup, but I'm going to give them that game at home, get some momentum going. At Mississippi State, Mississippi State's going to be like a 2 to 3 win team this year. They're kind of in that Vanderbilt category as of right now for potential layups there. So Florida actually gets out to, if they are able to beat Miami, you're looking at a potential 4-0 start, I think. But that Miami game could derail a lot of confidence, and especially in the coaching staff. If that game goes ugly, I really wouldn't put it past them to Ken Napier potentially after that game either. UCF, that's not a cupcake either. UCF's a team I think could win 8 to 9 games in the Big 12. But I am going to have Florida win that game, being at Florida. I'll give them the nod there at home. At Tennessee, I'm going to have a loss. That's a tough one going on the road there. First, Kentucky, I'll give them a win. And then I actually have them losing out from there. It doesn't get much more difficult than this. Georgia on a neutral loss. At Texas loss. Versus LSU. It could be a coin flip. LSU, I think, is the mystery team in the SEC this year. It could be a 9-10 win team. It could be a 5-6 win team with Nussmeier quarterback. You don't really know. And when you lose Brian Thomas, as well as Malik Neighbors there at receiver, and then a lot of question marks on the defense, who knows what this team gets, but really good offensive line at LSU. We already talked about them. But I'm going to give LSU the win there. I think that they're just a notch above this Florida team. First, Ole Miss, get them at home. Senior day could be a potential upset game there, but I'm going to go with Ole Miss. I think that they're a playoff team this year, could compete for the SEC title, and then at Florida State, have them losing that game. So got this squad going 4-8, just like last year, losing the last 5 down the stretch, and it'll be hard to bounce back for Billy Napier from that. My prediction for Napier is that he gets fired after the Texas game there, and he's not part of that complete skid at the end, and they get a look at some potential guys in-house for the job next year. DraftKings has the over-under sitting at this team for 4.5. Like I said, I got them only winning 4 games, so I would lean to the under there. The over is like minus 155. Definitely wouldn't take that. I just think it's way too difficult of a schedule. It's also a win total that I would maybe look at during the season. If they do go out to like a 4-0 start and that number does jump up to like 6 or 6.5 or something like that, maybe look at the under there with how strong the schedule is to end the season. But I'm going to go 4-8 for Florida this year, taking the under of 4.5, not an official play, but that would be my lean. And Billy Napier gets fired after the Texas game about midway through the season there. So that'll do it for the Florida Gators episode. As I said, please like, subscribe. Clemson coming to you next, but we'll keep it rolling here. 25 days till college football kicks off.